I may be mistaken, but I think a couple of weeks ago in passing you mentioned you also need to know when to reflect. So does reflection need to happen in the proper time, or knowing when reflect and when not to reflect, and also do we have control over that?
It's such a good question, and it's so complicated. I don't really know where to start. And what makes this, I think, very complicated is because we are multifaceted animals. We're not just focused on the spiritual. We're also focused on understanding, which is the mind. We're also focused on feeling. We're also focused in our social world. So I'm not really quite sure in what kind of context I should put your question. If you're talking about, say, a romantic relationship, okay, that could possibly lead to marriage and children and family and all that stuff, you should never feel for the person, fall in love with him, get married, and then later on be forced to think whether or not what you have done is right. It may be too late for that. Because when you fall in love in a romantic relationship, what happens is you become blind to all the deficiencies that you may have and all the deficiencies that he may have. I mean, we're no longer 18 or 19, so all of us in this room are kind of old, which means that we can't really just jump into relationships and hope for the best. It doesn't work that way. So when it comes to relationships, you save the feelings for the last. So you think, you reflect. So when you go to a coffee shop, you say, "Your name is Bob. I love that name. Do you have a job? How's your mom? How's your dad?" These are key questions that you ask. Do you have a house? Do you have stability? Is your head stable? Are your emotions stable? Do you have any addictions to anything? And you're asking all these questions because later on, when you do fall in love with this man, you don't want to be harassed with all these ridiculous issues that he may have. Okay? So you reflect at the beginning. Once he passes the test of reflection, then you open yourself up and now you allow yourself to feel. Because now you can be safe. If you're talking about working with a Bai Sahib, okay, the truth is, if you are an Irina, you're not at a place where you can understand what he's talking about. You're not at a place where you can understand what his intentions are. You have no idea, the exercises he gives you, what their purposes are. You don't understand them, And so if you say, "I want to understand, then I can feel," you'll probably kind of be ousted. He won't work with you for too long. And in a relationship with Bai Sahib, what usually happens is he forces you to feel first. And that's the yana part. That's the bhakti part. That's you fall in love. And you feel intensely. And you want to try to kind of figure out why this is happening to you, but you can't. That's not where you should go. Your, to some extent, mental faculties have been paralyzed by this emotion and need that. Because if you don't fall in love with Bhai Sahib, you can't submit to his teachings. You have the armies of doubt and other things coming in and just destroying whatever work he or she has done with you. Okay. And it's kind of like the movie The Matrix, where Morpheus kind of tells Neo, understanding comes in time, be patient. You'll understand in time, because he keeps saying, I don't understand what's happening to me. Why is this happening to me? And I think that's what every student feels. Because what happens is, when you have a lot of emotions and all these emotions running wild, you have this genuine sense of poverty. You're losing control over your life. You're losing control of your mind. You're losing control of your decision-making powers. And these are just justifiable fears and doubts that you just need to have. They just come naturally. And you want to understand why this is happening to you. But, working with a Bhai Sahib, you don't have the privilege of reflecting about these things, understanding. You can think about them, they'll just add more to your confusion. So what happens is, you feel, and you feel intensely for a long period of time, and little by little you have understanding through reflection. If, for example, if I was to put this in a different context, let's say you have an issue with a parent, okay? You feel as if you've been shortchanged. You were not very involved. They were not very involved in your life. And you want to understand. There are a couple of things you can do. You can kind of learn the art of empathy, which means putting yourself in their shoes. But you can't do that at the age of 20 or 30. You can only do that when you become a parent, first get married, then become a parent, and then see how children change your relationship with your husband, change your relationship with yourself, change the way you relate to time. Then you're going to have all these emotions called anger, resentment, frustration. Remember, Ginning, you are a professional woman now. You work at Kaiser, you teach, you're independent. Your life belongs to you. You're not yet at a stage to understand what happens when a tiny little infant robs you of everything you have worked so hard to obtain. Okay? And so, you can't do empathy by simply imagination, by simply reading a book. It doesn't work that way, And so what happens is, you have these, negative feelings towards a parent figure for a long time. You try to understand, and you can some of them, but most often you miss the big parts, okay? And then what happens is, you get married, okay? And then you understand the complexities of relationship, that your husband comes home late a little because he has to work a bit late. Then your mind kind of goes all over the place. Was he talking to this person? Was he talking with that person? Who is he texting? And that kind of just agitates the relationship a little bit. And then, without being aware, all of a sudden you remember what your mom said to you like 20 years ago. Yeah, your father used to come home and he was on his phone all the time, and I didn't know what the hell was going on. It just made me so upset. And now you realize you're in the same position. And then now you realize why your mom was angry all the time. Because you're angry all the time. Because you see your husband doing the same thing your father used to do. For example, Do you see? And then you have a child. Okay. You can't go to work as often as if you do. You know, there is nothing in your head. Your child has exhausted you. You know. You can relate to the stuff you're talking about because all you really want to do is just go to your car, lock the door, and go to sleep. You know, for a few hours. Your husband comes home and says, do we have some food? Food? Yeah, there's McDonald's across the street. Go over there and eat your dinner there. You know. And little by little you begin to understand why your parents were the way they were. You know. So reflection on this comes at the very end. You know, you have to be in the same position that your parents were to really, really understand. The bait is the emotions. You just need to make sure that when you take this bait called emotions, you're at the right place in life and you're pursuing the right things in life. If you're at a stage where you want to be married, emotions are not the baits you want. You want to think well. You want to make sure that this guy, symbolically as a car, his engine is not going to break down every 10 minutes. He doesn't have a flat tire. You know, that he's being tuned up. That it's a relatively new car. It can go 100,000 without breaking down. You know. So it really, in many ways, depends on where you are in life. And that stage will determine whether you should first approach your pursuit through emotions or through reflection. You know, you look at Oakland public school and it frightens you. And then through those emotions you say, okay, I need to think well now. Do I want to live in Oakland? Should I move to Sacramento? Do I have the funds for private school? You know, and if you can catch those emotions, you know, at the right time, before you're fully invested, then reflection can be very, very, very helpful. You know, if for example you go out on a date and you see the guy drinking 5 beers on your first date, you kind of feel a little weird about sitting next to a guy who's on a first date drinking 5 bottles. And then you go home and you begin to think. Okay? Now you need to make sure that you have the power to think well about this stuff. That you're not just enamored by the way he looks, by the car he drives, by the job that he has. You're at a place where you're looking at, you want a relationship to have a long shelf life. He spoke well, but he drank a bit too much. That makes you nervous. Now you sit back and you say, okay, Ginning, you got 2 jobs, you have little time, you have little energy. Do you want that little time and energy to be wasted on a guy who comes home drunk on a nightly basis? And then the reflection will kind of put a stop to the emotions and say, no, I'm not going to pursue this guy anymore. But you need to be able to think well. You know, if you have been an emotional junkie for most of your life and you've never really reflected on things seriously, emotions are just going to kind of push you here and there. If your question is living within the context of Irina and Bhai Sahib, Bhai Sahib will want all of your emotions to himself, no one else. He wants all of your mental energy to himself and no one else. And for you to belong to him and no other, you have to kind of be dead to all the things out there. And by that I mean you slowly find yourself to be detached. You can't feel anything outside of Bai Sahib. It's impossible. And so sometimes you may kind of, let's say Bai Sahib dies and you go back in the world. And then you say, why can't I feel anything? Because you're no longer in a stage of feeling about things. You have lived a detached life for like 5 years. That is who you are. Your position in life is one of observation. You simply observe, you think. And the only thing you can find yourself attached to is your passion for observation and reflection. And then, if you're good, expression.